Hello, Jeff here with A Taste for Whiskey, and I'm here with my good friend Bob, and we are continuing our series on the regions of Scotch. And I'm telling you, if you haven't watched our previous two, we've talked about a little bit of the intro, and we've talked a little bit about the islands, and now we're going to move into Highland.
Yeah, but we're taking our time with the last dram that we had. It's from the Highlands, from the islands, I'm sorry, and it's a Highland Park. And it's a 28-year-old from an independent bottler at cask strength. What do you think of this?
This is fantastic. And just to your point, when we were talking about the islands, you get that seaweed, you get that brininess, and you get a little bit of the fruit notes, but I get this effervescence of just this refreshing. It's almost like going back, it's like a good fine wine.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And I like it because it has what I call a maritime characteristic. It's got some of that. So just as a quick recap, we looked in the first one in the intro, we looked at the 5, traditionally I call them 6 regions. Lowlands, Highlands, Speyside, Campbelltown, and Islay. And I say that breaking off of the Highlands should be the islands.
Yep.
We tasted Highland Park, but also in the islands we have things like Talisker, we have things like Tobermory, we have things like Arran. All of those are in the island regions. But now we're moving to the Highlands, this big orangish area here.
Which is the largest part of.
Which is the largest part. And historically, and we'll save this for later, the Speyside region here was considered Highlands, and it still is. You can see on a lot of bottles, it'll say Speyside Highland Scotch.
Oh.
So we're in the Highlands, and the Highlands has some very big name distilleries in it. We've put 3 up here: Dalmore, Glenmorangie, and Glendronach, which we tasted in the opening segment. And Highlands is just this very diverse region since it's so large, and it has many different kinds of Scotch, different profiles, and that's because, and we've talked a little bit about this, that's because back in the 1800s when most of these distilleries were started, they had to rely on local resources. What barley was grown locally, what was available for them to dry the barley in. Some areas had no trees, so they had to dry it in barley, like on Orkney. They used barley from, we said, the Hobbister peat bog. Now we get down into the Highlands, and there becomes a more diverse range of peat. Now, today, they can import barley from all over Scotland. They can have it peated to whatever level they want because they don't do their own peating, but distilleries are very careful to follow the traditional profile of their distillery for the most part, which then mirrors the profile of the area.
Which is why we are talking to you about these regions, because each region, as we've said many times, they really are kind of known for their own specific profile. So you may not like Islay, and we talk about this too, and we'll get more into this when we get to the Islay and Speyside, but a lot of people have this misconception that Scotch is all peat and all smoke, and that's just not true.
It isn't true. There's as much diversity in Scotch as there is in any spirit. It can go all the way from the most heavily peated, the Octomore, the Brookline Octomore, which will choke you, or it'll choke me. Let me put it that way, to something very light and floral that you can get from Balvenie. However, we all know that Balvenie now has a peat week Scotch.
That's right.
And they're ordering their barley peated to a certain level.
Which is, I love peat week, by the way.
Yeah. So Highland Scotches. One interesting thing I want to point out about Glenmorangie. Glenmorangie is one of the lightest, fruitiest Scotches, for the simple fact that when you go to Glenmorangie, and you look at their stills, they are significantly taller than every other still you will see. As a rule, the shorter and dumpier a still, the heavier the Scotch. So you go to Lefroy, and they got these little squatty, little dumpy stills. You go to Glenmorangie, and they're these long, graceful lin arms, which allows only the purest of the alcohol to float all the way up there and liquefy and come down the lin arm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
which makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah. So when people say, you know, what makes Scotch, what goes into making Scotch different, the answer is a million different things.
Yeah.
Shape of the still, the length of the distillation run, the kind of yeast used in fermentation, how long the wort batch is mixed, what wood it's put into, where it's aged. All of those things go into it, and it really is interesting how these distilleries have tried to maintain their characteristics over time. And as we end with the Highland region, one quick story. When I was at, I believe it was at Glenmorangie, and the distillery manager told us that when their distills get damaged in any way, and they replace a section, and if that section had a dent, they will put the dent back in when they replace it so that it doesn't change anything that was going on in that still.
That, folks, that is why I love whiskey. That is why I love the art of whiskey, because it's not just alcohol in a bottle. There is so much love, there is so much art, and with Scotch, there is so much tradition. And that's why I love talking about these regions, Bob.
Yeah, good. So we've covered the islands, we've covered Highlands, and next, where would you like to go?
I say let's go to Speyside.
Speyside's next, folks. Slàinte.
Slàinte Mhar.